What mostly talking about today is just zero trace hiking, which is in essence the practice of leaving the environment as pristine as the way it was before any of the trails were there, or more specifically the way that you found it. Whether that be in a national park or just the forest outside your house, like there's ways and practices that you can enter those environments without leaving any trace. And it's far beyond just like picking up your trash. It's reducing impact and destruction of wildlife through walking on trails that are unmarked off into the woods. It's waste disposal. It's proper ways to like make a fire or not make a fire given the circumstance. I think all of us are pretty familiar with kind of the problems that come with people making fires in the woods these days with climate change and everything. But I guess the best way to summarize it is that like there's seven broad practices that are part of the principles of the leave no trace kind of effort. And the first one, and it's kind of good practice, even if you're not just trying to kind of preserve the ecosystem you're going into, but it's planning ahead and preparing. Most of the time, different parks that you're going to be visiting are going to have different restrictions and different ways that they want to keep the ecosystem that they're in. So visiting a local national park is going to have maybe a little bit more rules and regulations than like just the public state park down the road from your house. So like the difference between, I don't know, going down to like Droma State Park, just down the beach from here, that's pretty well maintained. They have a lot of staffing, which is great. But when you go up to somewhere like what's it called, John Muir or Camp Muir on Rainier, that is in a very sensitive alpine ecosystem. That's something that's going to have completely different regulations. So planning ahead, knowing what regulations you'll have to upkeep, like depending on the circumstance, depending on the location, is pretty essential. They don't have bathrooms up there at John Muir Trail, so that's a big one of planning ahead. Just general route finding is going to be a lot more common going up there. That's important because, well, you have to go mosey around without a map going to the woods. You're just, potentially get lost. You're walking on plants in an alpine environment that take a very long time to grow. Only about 3 months of the year they'll actually be growing, so you can damage the ecosystem pretty easily if you're not careful. So yeah, definitely read up on your location that you're going to, see what the park rules are and what specific regulations might be in place. I would limit group size if you can. It's definitely something that helps. It's not like a really set in stone rule, but hiking with a group of like 8 to 9 people is definitely going to be a little bit more impactful on the ecosystem than just hiking with your buddy. Uh, yeah. You can also repackage a lot of the meals when you're backpacking. That's a little trick that I learned over time, where you just have less trash that you're bringing into the environment. You're keeping it small and kind of only need what you need. A lot of those rehydrated meals you can Ziploc bag, and you just have one pot to boil all of them. You don't need all of the packaging that they individually come in, and that's less weight for you to carry, and it's less trash that can just get lost or blown away in the wind and find its way in some animal's stomach. So that's, yeah, just something that I definitely would encourage, and in that kind of planning, prepping kind of environment. Oh yeah, another thing, wouldn't mark trees if you're going off trail, like say to summit a mountain or anything like that. Just stacking rocks that are already in your environment is a perfectly good way. It's pretty common for people to like take an axe, cut the bark off a tree, just put spray paint in like a line on it, but that's unnecessary and kind of takes away the natural beauty that's around you if you're tagging everything's like with graffiti. And personally, wouldn't recommend that. But yeah. So another next one going on the list is I don't know, finding like a good and durable space to camp in. So there's gonna be places that are designated camping areas, whether it be front country camping, where you're just kind of driving up and getting out of the car, or back country camping. There still should be, regardless of where you are, a leveled area that has been pre-made for camping. That it's just very good to stick to those, because when you go out into the woods, beyond just getting the risk of getting lost, even if you have a map and a good way of navigating, if you're laying down a tent and putting your dead weight on the ground, you're compressing the foliage underneath you, and often that can break it in a way that it can't actually recover. So if you look off into the woods at very popular trailheads, you'll see flattened sections of grass that's dead and it won't come back. I mean, if you're wondering how quickly it happens, it can be only like two or three, you know, 2 or 3 times someone's camped there and it's completely killed off the grass in the area. I mean, just look at any like concert field anywhere like the gorge. I mean, the grass is watered and taken care of, but even then it dies just with all of the amount of people that are coming in and setting foot on it. Yeah, like you're also going to want to stay further away from tributaries and lakes and rivers, like streams. They're just sensitive ecosystems, especially things like wetlands that, just like having a presence to scare away birds and wildlife isn't particularly good. You want to kind of keep those places to themselves. I wouldn't like most campsites aren't going to be in a close proximity to those bodies of water since they are protected lands. So I don't know, like keeping camping where it's designated away from those areas is, I guess, something I'd recommend. And I'll dive deeper into that further on. There's a lot of reasons why you should stay away from those protected bodies of water, or at least just you can view them from a distance on a rock rather than just like trudging through like the temperate wetlands that we have around here. Another good practice is like just, I don't know, if there's people on the trail when you're going to these areas, and they need to get by, just wait for them to pass. Sometimes people will just kind of go around each other up on the hillside, but the more that people do that, the more they actually kill the grass and the plants in that given area and make new trail systems. And once a trail system is enough, it can be detected, or like imprinted enough into the ground that it can be detected. A lot of people just think it's part of what's already there. So you'll most commonly see that in a lot of like heavily touristed alpine areas around Mount Rainier, where there's just a web of dead grass where people just take shortcuts. And the more they do that, the more people follow them, and the more it kind of kills off like the plant life in a given area. And yeah, I would just try to avoid that. You're keeping you're preserving it not only for the future, but you're preserving those environments from further trafficking, I guess. But yeah, so further down the list, I think disposal of waste is another big aspect. I mean, human waste is definitely one of the more impactful things while camping and in the environment, that if you're, say, in a backcountry area, there's not a very clear way to dispose of it. There's no, toilets or anything. It's just the woods and the camping pad, and if you're lucky, maybe a table. So in backcountry areas, what you're going to want to do is dig a hole at least 200 to 400 feet away from any kind of stream or lake. And if you have to go number two, you're going to bury everything in that hole. And if you can, try and urinate too, in that like kind of hole that you've made. And I would go about a foot deep and cover it up when you're done. Um, the reason for that, there's a lot to it, but there's a lot of bacteria in human waste that can actually find a home and disrupt the natural microbiome of a lake or a river or water source, and can cause kind of outbreaks of given diseases. So they're like Angel Lake up in Mount, we're kind of near Mount Olympus, up in the Olympic mountain range. That is a very heavily forested, low elevation alpine lake that's a popular hike for a lot of people. There's active E. coli in the water there, that so none of that lake is potable because there's been such a huge amount of human waste that's kind of leached into the water from the nearby campsites that are there. That, yeah, I mean, it's kind of destroying the local fish populations. I mean, there's just outbreaks of foreign contaminants that people are bringing into that environment just through their waste material. I mean, and there's other things that like you'll learn from experience. Actually, my my friend Reese and I could talk about this all day, but I don't know. Like, there's been times where, they say don't pee near your tent, and we didn't realize that the reason people say that is not just for cleanliness, but it actually attracts wildlife. There's a lot of salt in your urine, and it's rare in a very rainy ecosystem like ours to have concentrated salt. It's just all dissolved and goes down the hill. So they can smell that and they will come and find it. And we had a whole entire group of mountain goat come up to us, which we were not expecting around 6 in the morning. There's about 20 of them, and it's pretty startling to see that many wild animals trying to sniff out the scent of human waste. It's yeah, it's unexpected, and it's something that is really going to increase like encounters with potentially hazardous things, like say like a bull elk. You just don't want to cross one of those, and having proper waste disposal is really going to help the wildlife around you and yourself more than anything. That also goes for things like soaps too. So if you're washing soap is considered kind of like a human waste product by, you know, because, well, we're the only things that use it. But the thing about soap that a lot of people don't realize is when you're using soap to wash dishes, if you're cleaning it in a tributary, there's sodium hydroxide, which is a strong base, and that is going to increase the pH of a lake or a river or a wetland. But the pH is pretty consistent in those environments. Like, wetlands tend to have an acidic pH, so only certain plants that can tolerate that grow in those wetland environments. But once those are killed off because of an influx of alkaloids from soap, that can actually really mess with the ecosystem around it. Once those essential plants die off, all of a sudden you don't have the same, say, protective root system that frogs laying eggs will need so that their babies don't get poached off by predatory species. So there's a lot of these downstream ripple effects that you might not realize in the moment, but can have profound effects on the environment around that. Anyone that say has grown like a rose in their rose garden will tell you that pH in the in the environment of growing one of those roses is really important. If you pour soap on a rosebud that you're still trying to grow, just the roots there, it will die pretty quickly. And there's a lot of plants that are no different. Plants that other animals need and thrive off of. So yeah, definitely, if you're gonna like clean your dishes, you want to pack the water either in by yourself, or you want to pot it from one of those water bodies independent of the actual source of water. So you pick up your water, you take it into the woods, you clean it with the water you've taken in that isolated area, not just putting the dishes in the river or in the lake to clean. So yeah, that's definitely a big one, lesser known one too. And I could go on and on. There's tons of little things that are learning more about how our environment is affected by that. But I can answer more of that with questions at the end if you guys are curious. Yeah, another big one. This one's probably the most I think understood by people going into the forest, is like a big part of leaving no trace is being very wary of fires. Um, Campfires can, as you well know, very much destroy an ecosystem and alter it irreversibly in a way that one person wouldn't normally be able to. I mean, like a dry area with one loose cigarette or a campfire above like 5,000 feet, or just in the wrong area, can wipe out hundreds of square miles. And we're seeing that more and more and more as the climate becomes drier and drier and drier. Like if like all of what I'm going to talk about too is if you're in a place where you can have fires, which is going to be determined by the park system that you're in or the forest that you're in, how low in elevation you are, because you don't want high elevation fires. Those are really hard to fight. If there's an area that's cut out, or like if there's a trench dug by wildland firefighters, maybe down in the lowlands, that's going to be pretty easy for them. But if you're at like I don't know, 6,000 feet in a subalpine fir forest that's been drying out on the north side of one of the mountains around here, and that lights on fire, well, that's kind of it. You just gotta let it burn, and that happens all the time. Yeah, so ways that you can combat that are going to be, yeah, check out the fire warning of a given area. They'll tell you if it's low or high. You want to, if it is allowed, you want to use pre-existing campfire rings in a given campsite. So don't just go into the woods and just start a fire because you felt cold a little bit. Stick to the campfire rings and pre-existing structures that the park uh, folks have like reinforced to make sure that no embers or coals escape the pit and potentially burn down the surrounding ecosystem. you know yeah, try and keep the fires small too, of course. Mostly work with like small sticks. You can maybe add a log or two, but you don't want a big bonfire in the middle of the woods. It's just going to kick up more embers that can travel further and farther and potentially start fires even miles away from where you are. um yeah, this one a lot of people know, but like when your fire is out, pour water on it. Coals can burn almost an entire day beyond when the fire goes out with the heat retained in them. That's, yeah, you definitely want to make sure it's completely extinguished before you leave any area where you've had a campfire. Once it's been poured on too, try and scatter the ashes just to make sure, like just pour them out of the area, not in any lake or river like we talked about, but just scatter them, disperse them, make sure they're just not lumped up in one area, so that you reduce the potential of any coals lingering and burning as much as you can. That's really going to help. Yeah, and another lesser known one, definitely try not to bring wood from an outside area. Like if you're, say, on a road trip and you see firewood, in Oregon, and you're going to take it down the highway 5 hours to your coastal campsite in California, those can be completely different ecosystems, and they can introduce different pests and like beetles and wood boring beetles into those ecosystems. So you want to try and use campfire logs that are sourced from the area. A lot of the time when you go to like a park system or anything like that, all the houses will be selling firewood around the area, or just a local gas station, and they're all cut from the kind of surrounding trees. There's plenty of pests that are introduced that way that kind of go unchecked by regulation. So yeah, definitely, yeah, use the local sourced wood. It's good practice. Um, so next, this is a lesser one, but I would, yeah, leave what you find. If you find any relics or plants or kind of like, I don't know, a bear skull, I don't know, anything, it's better just to leave it where you found it, not take it home with you. Um, it's hard to say how it's going to affect the environment because it could be anything from like, the bones of an animal to a plant, but nonetheless, if you're removing it from the ecosystem, then you're removing what it can provide, and there's a multitude of ways that different things found in the wood are going to be, I don't know, like necessary. Like the calcium from the bones of an animal are essential for a lot of like the fungal species that grow around here. They're decomposers. They require like foreign material to be ingested by them. So if you're just collecting stuff here and there, you're all you're doing is removing that. And yeah, I mean, there's also little special rules and subsets. So like if you find archaeological relics like Native American like arrowheads, you should definitely leave it where you are, bookmark it, and tell someone like a archaeologist or an anthropologist where you found it. It can lead to a lot of significant discoveries in a given area because it can be like a place that can be studied and further expand the history of a given culture. But once it's removed and taken home, it's, I mean, well, for one, it's technically illegal, but I don't know, it kind of stops the search at that. There's a lot that we can learn just by studying the way that nature is rather than trying to modify it by removing stuff from that. And a lot of national parks are going to back that up too. Like if you're a rock hound like I am, you don't do that stuff in national parks. You do it at given areas that are supported by the DNR, so that it's deemed able to remove structures from there. There's certain places I was actually going to say, like Lucas Creek. It's a popular area for at least the last 50 years for finding a type of carnelian agate. It's a very beautiful orange agate, but so many people were digging at that creek on the riverbanks searching for this elusive agate that they were completely upending root systems and disturbing soil sediments that were getting just kicked up into the river and smothering like small insects that fish populations were feeding on. And riparian zones like that can be very damaged, and when there's just all this silt and destruction of like riverbank ecosystems, so they had to shut that down, and it's permanently shut down, so it ruins it for you and the surrounding wildlife. It's something that needs to be maintained, and if they say don't look for rocks there, don't take anything, just leave everything where it is, you should do that. Yeah. um there's plenty of places that can accommodate that, but yeah, just have respect for the ecosystem that you admire. um yeah, so another big one, probably have seen stuff like this on YouTube. Respect the wildlife. Yeah, don't pet the bears. The bears will definitely eat you. That goes for even the cute little things like like squirrels, elk, anything like that. It doesn't have to be a dangerous animal to cause you harm or for you to harm that animal through spread of disease or just things that you want to think about, like uh temperament of animals changes the more exposed they are to people. So by kind of going up to them and feeding them and touching them, you can introduce diseases into their species, such as like the fungal infection that's been going around a lot of our local bat population. They think it's called white nose disease. It's like a fungal infection that infects their nose. It's introduced by funguses that people have brought into cave systems in Washington, and they're still trying to combat it by shutting those down and reducing that because that's unintentionally our fault. You know, just being in around the bats and I guess touching bats and stuff like that has definitely led to some problems in that area. But more importantly, the more animals become desensitized to us, they don't fear us, and that encourages contact between people and animals that can spread disease, like I don't know, coronavirus is one of those. But they can also lead to incidences like the videos I was referencing, talking about on YouTube, where you can watch people like be chased by buffaloes in Yellowstone because they wanted to go pet a cute bison, and it just opens up a whole can of worms doing that in ways that can both harm you and the environment. Um, so yeah, better just to bring your binoculars and the camera and just look, don't touch. You know, and definitely, yeah, if you're someone who likes to walk dogs, keep them well trained and on a leash. A lot of dogs do not realize the size of animals and will go after them if they see one. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Like, there's times too, like when you're in the winter or during mating season or nesting season for plants, those are especially sensitive times. So definitely keep away. Elk, like in the summer, will be a lot more aggressive than they are now because they're in the rut and they're mating and they're pumped full of hormones. And yeah, a lot of the time, if an elk or an animal like that harms a person too, unfortunately, even if the person's okay, the Parks Association can't like keep that behavior up and has to actually kill the animal, which is pretty common in places like Banff, where the city is like inside a national park. So yeah, human to animal contact can really lead some problems like that. So yeah, respect the wildlife in the same way they respect you. That's all I have to say on that. But yeah, I guess, and this is the final of the 7 points that I was going to go through, is be considerate of other visitors. Like I was saying with trails, like you want to yield to people to not have people take shortcuts to get around you, you know? Just wait your turn, let someone pass you. Don't just make a new trail just to save some time, or like when you're going on switchbacks on trails, don't cut straight up through that. Having people make their own trails like on a switchbacking hill going straight up it saves you time, but it kills plant life like we talked about before. And the more people that traffic that area, they make those switchbacks on the trails, not only so it's easier for people, but it also means that there's a less direct line for water to flow down on a trail. So if you make a shortcut and just do the path of least resistance for you, that is also the path of least resistance for any kind of water that's flowing down the hill. You can make entire creek systems and washouts on trail where it just erodes these massive trenches because you've just unintentionally made a creek channel by walking up the hill. And you'll see that pretty commonly on more traffic trails, like the whole rainforest, where they get 200 plus inches of rain a year. It's eroding a channel all the way through and disrupting tributaries in the local area. So we want to reduce that by, well, sticking to the trails. Yeah, uh, yeah, definitely try and camp away from the trail if you're doing that too. Um, it's better to just kind of stick to where the campsites are pre-existing, like I was talking about before. But the further away from the trail, the better. It just kind of reduces kind of human to human contact in that way. But yeah, uh, I don't know. Try and stay quiet too if you can. You don't have to be dead silent, but hooping and hollering with like groups of people out in the woods, it kind of disturbs the soundscape. And in spring, when you hear all these bird calls, a lot of them will group to more beautiful areas because, well, what we find beautiful or might be like a majestic meadow with a lakeside and a mountainside in the background. But that those untouched pristine ecosystems are also mating grounds for a lot of wildlife, and by like raising your voice and being loud, you're scaring them off and disrupting the calls that they make towards each other. So keeping it, peaceful and just trying to be a part of nature and the respect and listening to the sounds around you, not introducing new ones, is really going to preserve the general soundscape. Um, yeah, and yeah, I think that's the main seven. There's also little things that don't fit into a lot of categories that I didn't know how to bring up. But like if you do any off trail kind of navigating, like a lot of mountaineers do, where they're just walking across the boulders and not in the forest directly, try to avoid geotagging. A lot of people have caused a lot of damage in different ecosystems because they take the geographic coordinates of a given area and they publish it on their social media. And yes, it's beautiful, but now like 2 million people are aware of this place and they know how to get to it, so they go on this wild goose chase, just going off the trail up to the forest. And you know there's no infrastructure for that. The parks haven't built anything. It just becomes like a kind of like a trash heap in the middle of the woods that people tend to struggle to, or that the parks service has to either ban or kind of cut down. Like a really popular thing you might have heard of, and I've been there too, it's beautiful, but yeah, Vance Creek Bridge, that's a really well photographed area just across the water here near Shelton. It's an old railroad bridge. Someone geotagged that a long time ago, and people just started flooding in through like people made trails, and there's no facility for it. There's no parking. There's no bathrooms. It's technically on private land, and it's just kind of uprooted everything in there. Like, I mean, they've like cut down trees to make firewood so that they could camp on that area. People have fallen off the bridge. Since there's no guardrails, it's not a publicly touristed area, or at least it's touristed. It's not supposed to be public. And yeah, it's led to kind of a bunch of trash in the woods, and there's better ways to go about finding those areas. And a lot of the time, the Parks Association will, yeah, encourage, or not sorry, not encourage, but what should I say? Like, if they find an area that's touristed, they will often turn them and incorporate them into their infrastructure. But till that happens, it's best to avoid it and, yeah, not kind of keep up the spread of that kind of information through geotagging. But yeah, let me check the time at where we're at. We're at 6:44. Um, I think I wound up a little, or wrapped up a little bit earlier than I anticipated, but we could just go straight into questions if anybody has any. In general, I can talk as long
I
as you get.
I've got one that's in the chat, and Kate says, "What's considered locally sourced wood? Is there a distance that's accepted in the camping world?"
So they're locally sourced. It's not like this crazy like specific kind of thing. It's that most of the time, if you're going to a certain location in a certain region to like a trail or whatnot, you will see people who have cut down wood and they're selling it out of their driveway, or like it's within the region. So there actually isn't a specific metric that I'm aware of, because it's kind of relative to where you're going, but it's within the region, you know. Like like you'll see things like I don't know, if you've ever crossed the border to a lot of states, they'll ask you if you have any foreign fruits or vegetables with you, because they don't want invasive species spreading from one area to another nor do they want the pests that are come from one to go to the other. So that's kind of the idea behind it, is that it's not going to say locally sourced wood, but if I'm going to say Rialto Beach, which is about 3 hours from here, I should probably pick up wood in Forks, because Forks is what, like 5 miles from Rialto Beach, and all the wood comes from that habitat, that ecosystem. I'm not going to bring white birch from like the eastern side of Washington over and introduce some kind of wood boring beetle that they have yet to expect. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the principle behind it. So I guess to summarize it, it's not a specific metric for what is called locally sourced, but it's definitely regional. Like if you're bringing wood from, I'd say, an hour plus away from the location that you're heading, I would say that's a little too far. I would say find wood on the less than like the last hour of your trip to your destination if you can. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
It doesn't look like we have any other questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. Do you have any advice for what to do if one witnesses others not using leave no trace practices? Don't engage or advise as a teaching moment, or tell a park attendant?
It's kind of up to you. I think I would just approach it in a way that kind of begets the circumstance of it. Like if you see someone poaching like a wild animal on a national park, yeah, absolutely. Like that guy should not be out there, tell the park department. Or if you see someone say, I don't know, trying to have like a gender reveal party for their newborn baby in the woods in California in the dead of summer by lighting off fireworks, yeah, I would definitely notify not just the parks people. I would call the police like right off the bat. But other smaller attributes, people often who are into the outdoors are rather kind-hearted and open-minded, and there's little things that you wouldn't understand, like the soap thing, like using soap in a lake. It seems like such a small thing, you wouldn't think anything of it, but I mean, those soaps have potent chemicals in them which can change the pH of a given area quite drastically. So just little tips and tricks like that, and conveying that to people as best that you can, is really the best that we can do. It's like another thing that I do too is like you can educate through example. You be kind of the change that you're trying to bring to the environments that you're hiking in. It's picking up trash and maybe picking up someone else's trash if you see someone drop something, just to be the example to show other people. If you like it and you keep it clean, often people will see what they want to out of that, and I for the most part respect it. um I think there's only certain situations that are gonna beget like a stern-hearted, you know, enforcement, but if not that, yeah, just the best we can do is just educate, and uh address those things through both example and through what we're doing right now, through like just educational discussions on these topics, whether it be like a Zoom chat like we're doing, or just like hiking forums, or like for me, I work at REI, and REI has an insane amount of resources dedicated to just educating the general public about things like this. So having a balance of all three, I think, is what it's going to take. Yeah.
And one last question. Do you have any suggestions for types of food to pack that minimizes packaging?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like it's a two-parter for that one because um a lot of backpacking food is always going to have a ton of excessive packaging. It's like a double-edged sword because preserved food needs to make sure that moisture cannot be absorbed by it so that it stays sterile, you know, because like the whole point of having backpacking food is that it doesn't need a refrigerator, but if it doesn't have a refrigerator, it needs to be clean and edible and have a long shelf life without, well, a cold setting. So often that requires like sterilized vacuum packed packaging, you know. So what is best is that if it's a non-perishable item, like say like a pasta or, you know, like those mountain house meals that everyone eats, you know, like what's best to do is like consolidate it in a smaller baggie. A lot of those packagings take up excessive space and are made out of like metal. They're the boil bags that they come in, and they're huge, you know. A lot of the time you can group your meals to organize them in just like a basic reusable plastic bag or like that they have at like the grocery store, and you can fill them up, label them for like this food for this day, and all you need is just a little pot for water to boil in, and then you just add it right in, you know. And when that packaging is done, you don't need to throw it out. You just go home and you wash it. You just keep using it like a reusable sandwich bag, you know, or reusable Ziploc. Um, they're really cheap. They save you a lot of money, and they save you a lot of space too. If you have to put your food in a bear can, it's kind of like a square peg in a round hole. I mean, they don't really fit, and it's hard to get like, say, like you know, 5 days worth of food into like a bear can that's like, you know, the size of like a cooking pot, like this big. You know, it's hard. So that's something that I would definitely recommend. Is like, yeah, it's not just not using the packaging, it's focusing on reusability of packaging. And if you can, no packaging at all, you know. There's like all my Cliff Bars I just put in one big baggie, you know, because they're all the same. They're just Cliff Bars, and that works great. You know, I do the same thing with spices to spice up my meals. Like I just have reusable stacking, um, kind of like spice shakers that all clip together in one thing, and I've had that for like 5 years. You know, I don't need to like use like a ketchup packet or anything like that where I have all this excess trash that I got to also manage and hopefully not lose. Like it's, yeah, reusability of packaging I think is the key point. Yeah.
All right. It looks like we're in our last 5 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over
Oh,
to Colleen.
oh yeah. Wait, one thing I want to address. It looks like Kate was talking about the noxious weeds. Yeah, she actually brought up a really good point. I don't know if I actually covered that. Boot brushing, that is a really, really good practice. Yeah, that is something that is definitely a big problem that we've been facing is like there are invasive plants such as say Himalayan blackberry, which I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with. Those are just the blackberries that grow on the side of the road or in your backyard that take over everything. Those are not from here. They kill off everything around them. So yeah, boot brushing all the way before you go on a hike, especially in a alpine ecosystem or one like the Hoho rainforest. That's the best way we can fight kind of the spread of yeah, invasive species and invasive plants like that. Absolutely. Thank you, Kate, for bringing that up. Boot brushing. Definitely, definitely would recommend that. Yeah.
That's great.